There is a certain kind of love that lives in a pot on a stove. Not the kind you speak aloud. Not the kind you write in letters or confess under lamplight. It is the kind that simmers for hours, that fills a room with warmth before a single word is spoken. It is the love of a woman who feeds people, not because she has to, but because it is the only language she has ever fully trusted. In the Elmhurst neighborhood of Queens, New York, on a street lined with old brick and newer neon, sat a small Italian restaurant with no flashy sign, no Instagram presence, and a months-long waiting list on Friday nights. It was called Rossi's. It had been called Rossi's since 1961. Before that, it had been a dream carried across the Atlantic Ocean in the chest of a Neapolitan woman named Elena Rossi, who arrived in New York Harbor with $40, a bundle of dried herbs, and a recipe for red sauce that she refused to write down because, she said, if you need to write it down, you don't really know it. Elena's daughter learned the sauce. Elena's granddaughter, Maria, perfected it. And now, in 2019, Maria Rossi, 78 years old, ruled her kitchen with an iron ladle and a look that could stop a bubbling pot. She was small. She was white-haired. She wore the same apron she had worn for 30 years, faded now to a soft rose from what had once been red. She tasted everything. She trusted no one to salt the pasta water. She had sent back shipments of canned tomatoes 3 times in 1 month because they were not the right kind of San Marzano, and she would know the difference, she told her supplier, before he could even open his mouth to argue. Her grandson Marco had grown up in this kitchen. He had learned to roll pasta at age 5, standing on a step stool beside her. He had burned himself on the oven door at age 7. He had, at age 12, been permitted to stir the sauce, a privilege she had never granted anyone outside the family. This kitchen was his inheritance. This food was his bloodline. And on a cool Tuesday evening in October 2019, Marco Rossi walked into that kitchen with someone she had never met. Nona, he said carefully. This is Isabella. He paused. He had rehearsed this moment. She's Filipino. Nona Maria looked at the young woman. Isabella was warm-eyed, composed, dressed simply in a blue blouse. She smiled and extended both hands, a gesture so sincere that Nona Maria's face softened immediately. Bella, Bella, she said, using the Italian word for beautiful, which happened also to be the girl's name. She kissed both of Isabella's cheeks. She told her to sit. She began moving pots. It was going well. It was going beautifully, in fact, until Isabella, trying, genuinely trying, to connect, said the sentence that changed everything. Actually, Nona, I'd love to cook for you sometime. I make a version of spaghetti. The kitchen stopped. Nona Maria set down the wooden spoon. She turned around slowly. A version, she repeated. The word sat in the air like a stone. There is no version of spaghetti, she said, her voice measured but unmistakably firm. There is spaghetti. Or there is something else. You are Filipino. You make Filipino food. Don't touch Italian food. This is respect. Marco opened his mouth. Nona, that's not. I speak truth, she said, cutting him off, not unkindly, but without any room for argument. I see on television, Filipino spaghetti. With hot dog. With banana ketchup. Sweet like candy. She shook her head slowly, as if recalling a small grief. This is not spaghetti. This is insult, to my grandmother, to Italy, to every Italian cook who has ever lived. You want to cook? Cook your food. Leave Italian food to Italians. Isabella's face did not crumble. She did not cry, or argue, or leave the room. She held herself with a quiet dignity that was, had Nona Maria been watching more carefully, itself a kind of answer. She simply said, I understand, Nona. I didn't mean to offend. But her eyes glistened. And the room had gone completely cold. That night, after Isabella had gone home, Marco sat across from his grandmother at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework as a boy, the same table where family decisions had always been made. Nona. His voice was low and controlled. You can't talk to her like that. It's just food. Nona Maria looked at him for a long moment. Then her voice broke open, not in anger, but in something deeper. Just food. She said the words as if they were incomprehensible to her. Food is not just anything. Food is history. Food is love. Food is who you are. She pressed one hand flat against the table. My grandmother taught my mother. My mother taught me. This recipe, this sauce, it traveled from Napoli to America in my grandmother's heart, because she had nothing else. She had no money. No English. No connections. She had this. She gestured toward the stove. And now people put hot dogs and sugar and call it spaghetti. No. This I cannot accept. Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, Isabella's grandmother also came to America with nothing but her recipes, Nona. Her food is her history too. He paused. Maybe you two have more in common than you think. Nona Maria turned away from him. We have nothing in common. She wants to ruin spaghetti. I protect it. This is different. She said it like she believed it. But that night, alone in her kitchen, she stood at the stove for a long time without cooking anything. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Isabella stopped coming to Sunday dinners. Her absence was noted by everyone but spoken of by no one. Marco showed up, ate, helped with the dishes, and left earlier than usual. The easy rhythms of the kitchen, the laughter, the arguments about whether the sauce needed more basil, felt slightly off, like a song played in the wrong key. Nona Maria told herself she was right. She had protected something important. She had defended her grandmother's memory, her mother's sacrifice, 60 years of craft that could not simply be casually borrowed or remixed or sweetened with banana ketchup and called by the same name. She was right. But the kitchen felt emptier. She began adding extra portions to the Sunday meal without realizing it, as if she were still cooking for someone who wasn't there. Then one Sunday, Marco didn't come at all. He called instead. Nona. His voice was different. Quieter. Isabella's grandmother, her Lola, she's very sick. Isabella's been at the hospital all week. A pause. She's not doing well. Nona Maria stood at the kitchen counter, holding the phone, and said nothing for a moment. Because she knew. She knew what it meant to be a granddaughter sitting beside a woman who had taught you how to cook. She knew what it meant to watch the hands that had shaped your whole understanding of love go still. She knew the particular grief of losing not just a person, but the living memory of everything they carried, the recipes that existed nowhere except in their bodies, the knowledge that walked out of the world with them when they went. She knew. Something shifted in her chest, something old and stubborn and proud, and cracked, just slightly, at the edges. She put down the phone. She walked to her pantry. She began to cook. No one had asked her to bring anything. But 3 hours later, Nona Maria Rossi arrived at the hospital in Queens carrying a wide pot wrapped in 2 dish towels, a loaf of bread wrapped in wax paper, and a small jar of her red sauce, sealed and labeled in her handwriting. She asked the nurse at the front desk for Isabella Reyes. Isabella came to the waiting room with red-rimmed eyes and a face that had not slept properly in days. She stopped when she saw who was standing there. Nona Maria held out the pot. You haven't eaten, the old woman said. It was not a question. Isabella stared at her. My grandmother, Nona Maria said, and her voice was different now, slower, like something being carefully set down. She came to this country afraid. The food she made was all she had to offer. When I was a little girl, she said to me, when you feed someone, you tell them they matter. That is all. That is everything. She pressed the pot gently into Isabella's hands. I think maybe your Lola said something like this too. In different words. In different food. But the same thing. Isabella held the pot. Her chin trembled. I was unkind to you, Nona Maria said. This was wrong. And in the fluorescent light of a hospital waiting room, two grandmothers, one present, one fading, were somehow both in the room at once. Isabella set the pot on a nearby chair. And she embraced the old woman. Nona Maria, who had not been held by anyone outside her family in years, stood very still for a moment. Then her arms came up. And she held on. Isabella's Lola passed away 11 days later. At the memorial, the family served her most beloved dish, a table of Filipino food, arrayed in the tradition of the feast, the handon, that her Lola had always assembled for any occasion worth honoring. And at the far end of the table, contributed by an 78-year-old Italian woman who had arrived an hour early to help set up, was a pot of Neapolitan red sauce and a basket of homemade bread. Nobody had asked Nona Maria to bring it. She had simply known. 3 months later, in the back kitchen of Rossi's restaurant, a Sunday afternoon that would become the first of many, Nona Maria Rossi and Isabella Reyes stood side by side at the stove. Isabella was explaining the particular sweetness of Filipino spaghetti. Not defending it. Explaining it. The history of it, how the dish had emerged during American occupation, how hot dogs were a luxury ingredient in post-war Manila, how the sweetness wasn't an accident or an error but a reflection of a specific time and place and people making joy out of scarcity. Nona Maria listened. She did not agree with everything. She never would. But she listened. And then she said, "Show me." Isabella looked at her. "Show me how you make it," Nona Maria said. "I don't have to like it. But I want to understand." Isabella smiled. She reached for the pan. And in a kitchen that had held 60 years of one family's story, a new chapter quietly, deliciously began. Because food is never just food. It is the map of where we came from. It is the language of what we could not say any other way. And when we are brave enough to taste someone else's history, really taste it, with humility and without judgment, we find that the hunger we were trying to feed was never really about food at all. It was about being known. Thank you for listening to Filipino stories on this platform. Please kindly like and subscribe to get more interesting story time.